Welcome to Reinventing Capitalism, a space where tech, social entrepreneurship, and impact intersect. We hope that you will get inspired by companies that are having an impact while making a profit. I am your host, Claudia Thomas. Today, we have Tessa, the co-founder and CEO of Olio, the anti-waste app tackling the climate crisis by solving the problem of food waste in our homes and local communities. Olio does this by connecting people with their neighbours, so they can give away, rather than throw away, their spare food and other household items. Prior to Olio, Tessa had a 15-year corporate career as a digital managing director in retail, media, and financial services, and she met her co-founder while they were studying their MBA at Stanford. Tessa was invited to give a TED Talk in 2023, and her presentation about the power of sharing has been watched over 1 million times. Join us to learn how Tessa is revolutionizing the food waste problem by redistributing more than 100 million meals to local communities. Hi Tessa, how are you?
I'm very good, thank you.
Thank you so much for being here today. I have to say that I'm very, very happy that you're here because I truly admire everything you're doing. I've told you right before we started, but to my eyes, you are a superwoman. So I hope that with this conversation, we can inspire more women to raise their voices and strive to become leaders in their fields. So you are the founder of Olio. Tell us about the problem that Olio is solving.
So Olio exists to solve the enormous problem of waste in our homes and local communities. We started off specifically focused on the problem of food waste. So let me tell you all about that. Globally, a third of all the food we produce each year gets thrown away, which is worth over $1 trillion. Alongside that widespread waste, we have widespread hunger. So there are 800 million people who go to bed hungry each night, who could be fed on just 1/4 of the food that we waste in the Western world. And then, as if all of that weren't bad enough, the environmental impact of food waste is absolutely devastating. If it were to be a country, food waste would be the third largest source of greenhouse gas emissions after the USA and China. And the reason for that is because a landmass larger than China is used every single year to grow food that is never eaten. And all of that data is all kind of very mind-boggling. Let's take the problem of food waste a bit closer to home. And in particular, let's sort of dig into the environmental impact of food waste in a more relatable way.
Yeah.
And a stat that I recently encountered that absolutely sort of blew my mind was when I discovered that the greenhouse gas emissions from 1 kilogram of food waste, so let's imagine your food waste caddy at home, is equivalent to the greenhouse gas emissions from landfilling 25,000 plastic bottles.
Wow. You cannot even imagine 25,000 plastic bottles in your mind.
Exactly. And then the other thing that many people find incredibly shocking to discover about the problem of food waste is that if you were to ask most people, where do you think food waste takes place? Where is the problem? Most people would say it's the supermarkets, and they might say it's food waste being wasted at the farm gate. But actually, in a country such as the UK, 60% of all food waste takes place in the home. So that is you and me and everyone who is listening. And supermarkets are only responsible for roughly 2% of all food waste. So if we want to solve the problem of food waste, we've really got to solve the problem of food waste in our homes. And the core insight that we've got at Olio is that the reason why we waste so much food in our home is not because people enjoy throwing food in the bin, but it's because we're no longer connected to our local community. We no longer have anyone to give our spare food to. Okay. So the app exists to solve that problem. We very quickly, though, found that people were using the Olio app not only to give away spare food, but also to give away random items that they had in their household. They just didn't really know what to do with them. And so now we've expanded Olio so you can use it to give away books, clothes, toys, toiletries, cleaning products, stuff you don't want to sell, you don't want to ship halfway across the country, but that you know could have a useful second life with someone else. And so that's then taking us into that even bigger piece of tackling the problem of waste in our homes more broadly.
Absolutely. I love that you've started small and like started solving one problem, but you've realized that there's a lot more that you can do with the same technology, with the same way of approaching food waste. I think food waste, you might think that it's something that happens in maybe underdeveloped countries and that it's very far from you being able to take action. But you've started in the UK. So what's the problem of food waste and I guess like people that live in hunger in the UK? Do you have that stat?
Yeah, so in the UK, we're very typical to most other countries in that roughly a third of all the food we produce each year gets thrown away here as well. And I know that households in the UK throw away 17 billion pounds sterling worth of perfectly good food every single year. And I know that businesses in the UK throw away 2 billion meals worth of food
Wow.
every year. And alongside that enormous level of waste, we have 10 million people who are living in food poverty, 4 million of whom are children. Now, it's really important to stress that sort of food waste is not the solution to food poverty, but redistributing surplus food to local communities can make a massive impact on individuals, on families, and also it has an incredible environmental impact as well. So we're really, really keen to get everybody sharing their food, redistributing their food rather than throwing it away.
So before I ask you about Olio per se, what is it that sparked the idea of Olio in the first place?
So I'm a farmer's daughter. I've always grown up with a massive appreciation of just how much hard work goes into producing food because I had a misspent or well-spent childhood, depending upon how you look at it, working incredibly hard on my family farm. So, the summer of when I was sort of 10 or 11,
Hmm.
the task for myself and my two younger brothers was that we had to weed by hand a 9-acre field that my parents were experimenting with organic farming at the time. And when you've done work like that, you realize that a carrot isn't just a carrot. And you would never dream of putting perfectly good food in the bin. Anyway, sort of fast forward many years after that, I found myself living and working overseas, but moving back to the UK. And on moving day, the removal men told me I had to throw away all of our uneaten food. And obviously, the farmer's daughter in me said, no way, I'm not prepared to put perfectly good food in the bin. So instead, I bundled up my newborn baby and toddler and I set out onto the streets, clutching this food, hoping to find someone to give it to. I failed miserably, unfortunately, because the lady who was normally in her one spot for some reason was not there that day. So I shed a few tears of utter frustration. I'd gone to all this effort on a very stressful day to try and share this food and had failed. I went back to my apartment feeling very despondent, but I was not to be defeated. So when the removal men were in another room, I ended up smuggling the non-perishable food into the bottom of my packing boxes.
Stop it.
Yeah, and that was when I just thought, Tessa, stop it. You are taking this too far. This is ridiculous that you're
Yeah.
having to resort to this. And at that point in time, I'd spent a decade working in the digital space. I knew there's an app for everything, and I couldn't believe there wasn't a simple app where I could just advertise my spare food, and anyone who wanted it could request it and pop around and pick it up.
So what happened from that moment until you actually started the company with your co-founder?
So I told a few people about this idea of a neighbour to neighbour food sharing app, and I think most people thought that baby brain had got the better of me and I should get off maternity leave and go back to work pretty pronto. But luckily, my co-founder Sasha, she is the daughter of hippie entrepreneurs from the Midwest in the US. Like me, she'd sort of, I guess, ran away from her upbringing, pursued a very classic corporate career. But when I told her about this idea of a neighbour to neighbour food sharing app, she absolutely loved it. And we researched the problem of food waste. We discovered everything I shared with you. It blew our minds. We couldn't see anyone else working to solve this problem. So we committed to working together to make Olio a reality. The first thing we did was some market research to find out if it was a problem that anyone cared about. And the core data point coming out of that was 1 in 3 people told us that they were physically pained throwing away good food. And that was sort of great news in that it meant, oh, we are trying to tackle a mainstream problem. 1 in 3 people are physically pained throwing away good food, and there's been no innovation since the rubbish bin. So that was
Yeah.
a sort of a big tick in the box for us to proceed. But that didn't necessarily mean the next step in our hypothesis was correct, which is that we could connect random strangers to share food. And we wanted to test that without sinking our life savings building an app that in all probability people wouldn't want to use. So what we did was we created a WhatsApp group for 12 people who did that market research survey, who lived near each other, didn't know each other, didn't know us. And we said, for 2 weeks, if you've got any spare food, here are some people who might or might not be interested in sharing it. And after waiting with bated breath for sort of a day and a half for anyone to share anything, someone did finally share something. And then over the 2 weeks, we actually had quite a lot of food shared by that WhatsApp group. And that then gave us the courage and conviction to go ahead and build the Olio app. And how the app works is really simple. Anyone who's got any spare food or other household items can just snap a photo. They add it to Olio. Neighbours living nearby get an alert. They can browse the listings, request what they want, and pop round and pick it up. So it's hyper local. It's neighbour to neighbour. It's about giving perfectly good things a second life.
That's amazing. And I've I've read you have a lot of volunteers working for Olio. How do the logistics work with these volunteers? Do they take the food and then bring it to the local communities, or how does that work?
Yeah, so we've developed something called our Food Waste Heroes program. We've now got about 130,000 volunteers, Food Waste Heroes we call them. And how it works is once you have completed our training and passed the test at the end, you can then claim a collection slot. And a collection slot is an opportunity to go to a local business at a certain time and day. So, for example, Tesco is our largest client. We redistribute surplus food from 2,700 Tesco stores. And let's say it's a Thursday, you'll pop out of your house, you'll go across the road, you'll go to your Tesco, you'll pick up all of their unsold food, you'll take it home, add it to the Olio app. Within minutes, your neighbours are requesting it, and minutes later, they're popping round and picking it up, which takes that food from having been considered a quote-unquote waste stream in the store to, on average, within just 1 hour, instead being fully redistributed into multiple homes in the local community. And we collect surplus food from Tesco, Sainsbury's, Asda, Iceland, so most of the major supermarkets. We're also collecting and redistributing unsold and unserved food from corporate canteens, from schools, from hospitals, and also from TV and film production shoots.
I guess I'm trying to put myself into the position of wanting to give and take food. And I feel like it would be easier to give away my surplus food than take the surplus food from someone else. I think that just maybe a bias I have in my head because I've never done it before. So I wonder how has been the process of getting clients or people to use the app? Has this happened? Have you seen these, I guess, bias of or embarrassment of taking food from someone else?
So that bias or that assumption is extremely common, and it's also totally incorrect. So most people assume that we must have difficulty finding enough people who want to pick up food, but actually the reality couldn't be more different from that. There is no shortage of people who want to pick up free food from a neighbour. So a typical food listing added to the app is requested in approximately half an hour.
That's
our
fast.
number one challenge, it's super fast. So our number one challenge is encouraging people to take 10 seconds to add their spare food to the app. And we definitely have something that we need to overcome, which is the fact that many people will assume, well, I wouldn't go and pick up a head of broccoli or a baguette or whatever it might be. So they assume that no one would go and do that. But and we sort of refer to that as the middle class problem. And so we just have to work really hard to remind people that what they have has immense value to lots of other people, and it's incredibly rewarding and fulfilling to take that short amount of time to add something to the app and to give it away to someone who's living nearby, for whom they definitely want that item of food, and perhaps they also really need that item of food as well.
Yeah. So now that you have all these users in the app, what has been the messaging that you have used that has worked to promote it?
So in the early days, and I say honestly, probably until quite recently, myself, Sasha, and the team were incredibly motivated to try and solve the climate crisis at scale, because food waste in particular accounts for 10% of all greenhouse gas emissions, and also consumption by all of us in our homes is responsible for 65% of greenhouse gas emissions. So if we can get people sharing stuff instead of wasting, borrowing instead of buying brand new, we can really make a meaningful dent in the climate crisis. So that's what motivates us. But what we have learned is that actually most people are motivated instead by the personal impact that they can have through using Olio. So we believe that we live in an age that we refer to as the age of selfish altruism. And so people will do good and positive things, but they need to know what's in it for them. So in our case, it's about leading with messaging about the personal impact, which if you're an individual, it's about it sort of feeling good to share. It's got to be tried to be believed, but it really is an amazing feeling when you give something away that sort of makes someone else's day. And from a business perspective, that is often about helping them to generate revenues or save costs. But then the next most powerful layer of messaging is the messaging around the people impact, the community impact that Olio can help. So the fact that we are helping to feed people during a cost of living crisis really, really resonates. And it resonates far more than talking about greenhouse gas emissions or the climate crisis or a heating planet or anything like that. So we've learned to really sort of lean into the personal and the people.
Yeah.
And we just sort of put the planetary messaging as fairy dust that we kind of sprinkle over the top. And that's a complete reversal of how we used to talk about Olio.
That's a good point. I think that we want to share what's happening in the world because it's definitely not the right well, it's definitely not good, and we're not going into the right direction. But there's a lot of us that don't see it. There's a lot of people that don't see nature, are not surrounded by nature, or cannot feel it. So I guess it's very hard for people to change their behaviors if they cannot truly see the impact that will have. Do you think that's part of the problem? Or
Yeah, absolutely. And that's why if you lean into the personal, people get that feedback loop immediately. You get to have that incredible sort of doorstep connection and have that experience of meeting someone else and giving them something. And often through the app, people will then send photographs, or we've got a little digital thanks feature, and people will send these sort of thank you notes. And that is what helps reinforce behavior and makes you think, oh yes, I will continue doing this, much more than any knowledge of how many grams or kilograms of greenhouse gas emissions you've helped avoid.
For sure. Your most recent milestone is that you reached 100 million meals distributed. Which is the data that you're tracking to show your environmental but also social impact?
So, as you mentioned, we track the number of meals that we've redistributed. We track the number of neighbour to neighbour doorstep connections that have taken place. So we've had almost 50 million neighbour to neighbour doorstep connections take place. And we also convert the environmental impact of the amount of greenhouse gas emissions that we've saved into a metric that is more relatable for most people. And so we know that as a result of the sharing that's taken place via Olio, we've had a positive impact in terms of reducing greenhouse gas emissions, equivalent to taking over 780 million car miles off the road. And our sharing has also helped save over 30 billion litres of water. And that's because food is incredibly water intensive. You know, an apple isn't just an apple, it's 70 plus litres of water went into making it. And then in terms of the social impact, we have done surveying which shows that 40% of our community say that they've made friends through the app. 2/3 say that sharing has improved their mental health, and 3/4 say that sharing has improved their financial well-being. So the social impact is just as strong as the environmental impact. And I think that's true of many sustainability-oriented initiatives. Actually, when you do good by the planet, you do good for people as well.
For sure. Olio was founded by you and Sasha, which I think is very unique because I don't know a lot of companies where both co-founders are female, which is something that I love.
Mhm.
What's unique about the culture at Olio that you think you two have brought to the company?
So I think because we are a female co-founded business, we do look at the world and approach things in a slightly different way. Both Sasha and I have really enjoyed, we had a long corporate careers, about 40 years between the two of us prior to co-founding Olio. And as we've built the company and the culture, we have implemented roughly half of the stuff that we experienced in our corporate environment that we thought really works and is a great thing. And then, so examples of that would be 360 feedback processes and stuff like that. But we've also sort of happily ditched the other half of stuff that we felt sort of didn't necessarily make sense to us. And a
Yeah.
classic example of that would be we founded Olio as a remote first business from day one. So we've never had an office. So this was many years prior to COVID. So I think we're not afraid to think differently and build the company culture in a way that makes sense to us. One of the key things that runs throughout everything we do at Olio are our company values. So we've just got 4 of them.
Hmm.
They are inclusive, resourceful, caring, and ambitious. And they are values that really reflect Sasha and I in terms of how we show up in the world, and we recruit everybody against those values. We do our sort of 360 performance feedback processes against those values, and we use them on a daily basis to help us make decisions in the business as well.
I love there's caring there. Caring, it's normally
Yeah.
related to a very female persona. I wonder if like any men would ever think of using caring as a value for their company.
I highly doubt it, but what I also love about it is the fact that it's right next to ambitious
Yeah,
um, as a value as well. And that I think is the most interesting thing is we believe it is possible to be caring and to be ambitious. They are not opposites. They're actually can be extremely complementary.
I agree. How big is the company at the moment?
Well, depends how you define scale, but if you're talking in terms of the team, then we are roughly 65 people right now.
Okay, awesome. And do you have any hiring plans slash growth planned for Olio in terms of the people that you're going to bring in?
So we definitely have a lot of growth plans in terms of our impact and the volume of items that are being shared via the app each month. So each month we've got over 4 million items are successfully shared between neighbours, and of course we want to exponentially grow that. In terms of growing the team, actually Olio was quite a bit bigger a couple of years ago, and we've downsized in response to the challenging macroeconomic environment. So we were just over 100 people, and we're now
Hmm.
down at 60, 65. We really, really like the size that we're at right now. And I think that in a sort of post AI world, we'll be thinking very carefully about any expansion. So we're not planning to go on any sort of hiring sprees anytime soon.
There's a part of me that loves the answer because it seems like you're very efficient and you clearly know what the company
It's
needs.
resourceful.
Resourceful.
Yeah, it's our number 2 company value. Yeah.
But it's sad because you are a company that I would recommend to a lot of people. So I wish there were more opportunities for young professionals to join Olio.
Well, they can always certainly become a food waste hero and experience our volunteering program at the very least.
Yeah, and work with you guys somehow. What are
Yeah.
your thoughts about the current form of capitalism and the idea of reinventing capitalism?
So that was why I was excited to talk to you, because I think that capitalism is long overdue a reinvention. It is remarkable to me, sort of, it's only 10 letters in that word, and yet it carries so much weight. I think one of the biggest mistakes that we're all collectively making right now is that we are conflating the current version of capitalism with sort of what capitalism is. And I think we need to remind ourselves that the current version of capitalism is a very new version of capitalism. It's only roughly sort of 50 years old. And what I mean by the current version of capitalism is the one which prioritizes shareholder returns
Hmm.
sort of above all else. And it is very clear to me that that model is no longer fit for consumption. No longer fit for consumption. no longer fit, no longer fit for purpose, because it has sort of infinite growth, infinite consumption based at its core. We're not properly pricing in all the negative externalities that we're having on people and planet, all the resources that we're depleting, all the pollution that we're creating. The model is fundamentally unsustainable. So I think we need to really reinvent capitalism. And if I had a magic wand, the thing that I would do is I would enact, certainly here in the UK, a small piece of regulatory change, which is being championed by the Better Business Act. And the Better Business Act is a movement of a couple of thousand businesses of all sizes who want to change, I think it's roughly 12 words in section 172 of the Companies Act, which at the moment says that the fiduciary responsibility of company directors is to maximize shareholder returns.
Yep.
And instead change that wording so that the fiduciary responsibility becomes one where you have to give equal priority to people and planet as well as profit. And I really do believe that if we change sort of the North Star metric, if we change the rules of the game for capitalism, then we could unleash the very best of capitalism. We could be pointing it in the right direction, in a sustainable direction, in a direction that does not result in the extinction of humanity. And I'm really excited for when that will happen.
So is that what needs to happen to change how corporations operate? So like changing the success metrics and not having just one, rather having like impact, the environmental, I don't know, whatever really suits to show that there's negative externalities to these companies.
Yeah, well, I think so. A couple of things have to happen. So we need to change the rules of the game. So the Better Business Act is about changing the rules of the game. The other thing we need to do is change our North Star metric. So the North Star metric for humanity and for all our economies right now is GDP growth.
Yes.
And we seem to assume that infinite GDP growth in a finite planet, that we can kind of square that circle, which clearly we can't. So I'm very much in favor of us broadening the definition of success to a much more holistic set of benchmarks and metrics that better reflect sort of everyday people's lived experience and lived existence in a way that I just think sort of a single GDP metric, which includes lots of horrible stuff and misses out lots of crucial stuff, just can never do.
Yeah, absolutely. This, however, it's a metric for corporations and to understand the wealth of nations. How about consumers? Like, what should change so that consumers can also change their behaviors or adapt their behaviors?
Yeah, I mean, I think that what we need to move towards is much more of a well-being type metric, and I think that would just filter down through society. Like the reason why consumers behave the way we do is because of the system in which we live and exist, and it's really, really, really hard to opt out of the system or to try and live in a different way. And so at the moment, because we've got GDP growth as the North Star metric, we have created economies that, I mean, listen to how we've referred to ourselves as consumers, right? And we talk about us as being consumers rather than citizens, for example, or something sort of more positive and more holistic. So, and the reality is, though, that so many people just keeping your head afloat is really, really challenging. And I don't think we can expect people sort of en masse to reinvent the system. So I think there's a lot of onus on the politicians and the businesses to take the decisions that are required to change the system. But within the people, I do think there are a fairly sizable group of people, kind of the early adopters, who can start to try and challenge the system and take alternative decisions and live in a different way. And their role is absolutely crucial because they then perhaps start consuming differently, which then sends data up to the businesses, which they then react and respond to, which then makes sustainability more affordable and widespread and available for everybody. So I, as a sort of citizen, I think it's very easy to think, oh, it's all overwhelming, there's nothing I can do, it's all very depressing. And my view is sort of, if you can, you should. And there are millions and millions and millions of people in this country who can afford to live differently and consume differently and drive for a more sustainable future.
Yeah, I think this is a very powerful message because a lot of people say, oh, my action is not going to change anything. And that's not really true. An action leads to another action, and then that's how change happens.
Yeah. And also, let's use some contemporary examples. If your action didn't make any difference, then how are Instagram or TikTok where they are today, right?
Yeah, it
That was
started
just
somewhere.
millions, started somewhere, and that was just millions of people taking lots of actions that
Yeah,
compounded
yeah,
and built on one another, and they're now completely
yeah.
prevalent.
Uh,
And so we need to do the same for the sustainability movement.
Speaking about sustainability, what is Earth Overshoot Day?
So Earth Overshoot Day is the day in the year in which humanity has used all the resources that the Earth can replenish in a year. It was first measured back in the late 60s and early 70s, and back then Earth Overshoot Day was at the end of December. So what that means is humanity used in a year what the Earth could replenish in a year, so we were living in equilibrium with the planet. If you fast forward to this year, Earth Overshoot Day was the 1st of August. And so what that means is that every single thing that every single one of us, 8 billion people, are consuming after the 1st of August is net depletive to the planet. And so it doesn't take a rocket scientist to figure out that we cannot continue to consume at the rate that we are. So we're in a bit of a sort of the emperor's got no clothes scenario, and more of us just need to be shouting out that the emperor has no clothes. The current consumption-driven model is not the model that is going to prevail ultimately. And I just hope that we can take action as swiftly as possible, because already millions of people are suffering and dying as a result of this current model, and we just need to act as fast as we can to prevent more human suffering.
Yeah, for sure. In this podcast, we interview founders of for-profit, mission-driven companies addressing at least one of the 17 UN SDGs. Can be waste, can be hunger, can be climate. And the reason why it's because being for-profit, we believe that there's this financial incentive that attracts people to wanting to solve this problem. Do you think this is a fair way of looking at it, and that these, like, solving these SDGs will bring job opportunities, will bring health, wealth creation, and the chain of events that comes from that?
Yeah, so I am very, very passionate about the concept of profit with purpose. I really do think that that will be the new business paradigm. Sort of at the moment, we're stuck in this very dichotomous view of the world, which is we think on the one hand, if you're doing good, you must be a charity. I've lost count of the number of times people have assumed that Olio must be a charity because we're actually having a positive impact. And on the other hand, if you're growing very rapidly, then you're almost certainly a business and you're probably having all sorts of negative side effects.
Yeah.
And our view is that we need to be going down kind of that third path, which is combining the best of both worlds, which is how can we have the positive impact of charities, but operating at the scale and with the speed and pace of businesses. And that for me is where profit with purpose comes in. That's where the Better Business Act comes in. That's where becoming a B Corp, which Olio is, comes in. And I think that at the moment, collectively, we are just lacking imagination. We have become so indoctrinated and so brainwashed about the current economic consumption-driven model that we almost can't imagine a different world and a different future. But certainly, kind of sample of one, but I know it's one, it's sort of a sample that chimes with many people. Kind of in my experience, my family's experience, through living more sustainably, we are healthier, we are wealthier, and we are happier.
Mm-hmm.
And I think we've got to be unlocking that healthier, wealthier, happier at a society level. And I think profit with purpose and unlocking the SDGs are a really crucial part of that.
Which SDG you think that will generate more job opportunities, for example, if you had to guess?
I mean, honestly, I don't know. I really don't know. I think sort of with the SDGs, it's like asking you to sort of pick which is your favorite child.
Okay, fair.
It's really tough to do. We do need to nail all of them, and sometimes life is complicated and messy and does require us to do multiple things at the same time. So yeah, I wouldn't know which one would result in most jobs, I'm afraid.
That's fine. We can get a question non-answered. I have one last question for you, Tessa. I'd love to pick up your brain on where you think that the industry is going to. So I'd love for you to imagine that you're looking into a crystal ball that shows you the future. Where do you think we will be at in terms of food waste, circular economy, conscious consumption in the next 5 to 10 years?
Well, I can tell you where I'd like us to be, and then where I think we'll
Fair
be, and
enough.
sort of two very different things. I mean, I think it's worth just pausing to reflect back a little bit on recent history. So in 2020 and 2021, it felt like in 2020, certainly sort of in the UK / in the Western world, we collectively woke up to the fact that the climate crisis is real and it's happening now. So that was great news. And in our experience, we found that sustainability rocketed up the corporate agenda in that period of time. And it really was a top 5, if not top 3 strategic priority for the businesses that we were talking to. Then, unfortunately, the war in Ukraine broke out. Then there was kind of this macroeconomic meltdown took place. And since then, we have seen that sustainability has plummeted down the corporate agenda, and it's lucky if it makes it into the top 10. This is deeply frustrating and distressing, because precisely at a time when humanity needs to be doubling down and stepping forward at many multiples of the pace of what we're doing at the moment, we're actually stepping backwards. So there's a lot of climate talk and very little climate action. So that is concerning, but I think Mother Nature is going to remind us ever more vocally of the need for us to take action. And I can only hope that will provoke us to do what needs to be done as quickly as possible. In my dream scenario, in 10 years' time, we have eliminated 80 or 90% of all food waste, right? And we have moved our economic model to be one that's much more akin to Kate Raworth's sort of donut economics approach, where we're not exceeding planetary boundaries and we are making sure that everybody's basic needs are met. However, I'm not actually confident that that's going to happen on the 5 to 10 year time horizon. I think that I'm reminded of that saying, I can't remember exactly what it is, but it says that we sort of overestimate how much progress is made in a short period of time. We underestimate how much progress is made in a longer period of time. So in 50 years' time, will the world be almost unrecognizable from where it is today? I'm absolutely convinced of that in terms of how we live our lives. And will sustainability be foundational and not even a word, because it's just how we do things? Yes, absolutely. But I don't think we'll be getting there in the next 5 or 10 years, unfortunately.
Is a way of solving the food waste problem producing less food, or that's not a correlation?
It's very complicated as to why food waste takes place. But the reality is we've got another 2 billion people joining the planet by 2050. In order to feed us all, according to the FAO, we need to increase global food production by 60%. So producing less food is not going to be in our future. But if we didn't waste a third of all the food we produce, then we wouldn't have to produce nearly so much extra food, which is why I think that solving the food waste problem at the moment, it's a very overlooked problem. But as we live in an increasingly geopolitically uncertain world, as we live in a rapidly heating world, I am starting to see very, very early signs of the more progressive governments realizing that food security is going to become a top priority. And that then will mean that we'll start to look at food waste in a very different way, in particular for countries that import a lot of food.
Thank you, Tessa. This has been amazing. I wish you all the best with Olio, and I can wait to see how the company progresses in the short, mid, and long term.
Wonderful. Thank you very much.
Bye.